By the winter of 1944, World War II had reached a point where victory was measured not in miles gained, but in how much blood the ground could absorb. One such place never appeared in newspapers, never earned a name in history books, and never received a monument. The soldiers who fought there called it Iron Valley. Iron Valley was a narrow mountain pass buried under endless snow, surrounded by cliffs so steep that artillery shells often vanished before exploding. It had no cities, no civilians, and no beauty. But it had one thing every army wanted: control. Whoever held Iron Valley controlled the only supply route through the frozen region. Whoever lost it would starve. When Allied forces received orders to take the valley, they were told enemy resistance would be light. That was a lie. The first shots were fired before sunrise. Fog clung to the ground so tightly, soldiers could barely see their own boots. Snow muffled footsteps, but machine gun fire ripped through the silence like tearing metal. Bullets poured out from hidden bunkers carved directly into the rock walls. Men fell without ever seeing where the shots came from. The valley answered with echoes. Allied infantry pushed forward anyway, slipping in blood-soaked snow, dragging wounded men behind shattered stone. Mortar shells screamed overhead and exploded against the slopes, sending ice and rock crashing down like shrapnel. The enemy was dug in deep. Bunkers lay buried beneath ice and steel. Rifle fire poured out through narrow slits, cutting down advancing soldiers with ruthless precision. Every step forward cost lives. A young soldier named Harris crawled through the snow, clutching a radio, his gloves soaked red. He reached a frozen ridge and tried to call for artillery support. The radio screamed with static, then went dead. Enemy fire intensified. A tank rolled into the valley, its tracks grinding ice into slush. The moment it fired its first shell, anti-tank rounds slammed into its side. Flames burst from the hatch as the crew scrambled out, only to be cut down before reaching cover. The valley swallowed them. By midday, the ground was no longer white. It was dark, churned, and steaming. Orders came down to take the central ridge, the most heavily defended position in the valley. The soldiers knew what that meant: a frontal assault. Whistles blew, men stood up and ran. Bullets tore through the air so thick they sounded like fabric ripping apart. Soldiers fell in waves, tripping over frozen bodies locked in unnatural positions. Grenades exploded in blinding flashes, throwing snow, blood, and metal into the fog. Harris ran until something slammed into his shoulder and spun him into the snow. He screamed, but the sound vanished beneath gunfire. He watched another soldier kneel beside him, only to disappear in a burst of red as a sniper's bullet struck his head. There was no time to stop. The fighting turned brutal and close. Bayonets flashed, rifles became clubs, men screamed in languages no one understood anymore. Blood froze on steel almost instantly. Faces disappeared beneath ice, dirt, and smoke. Then the enemy counterattacked. Dark figures surged down the slopes, shouting orders, firing wildly. The two forces collided in chaos, bodies crashing together, weapons jamming, knives flashing in the fog. No one knew who was winning. No one knew who was alive. Artillery finally answered. Shells slammed into the valley walls, collapsing bunkers and burying men alive. The ground shook violently as snow avalanches thundered down, crushing soldiers from both sides without mercy. By nightfall, Iron Valley fell silent. Not peaceful, empty. The survivors, few and broken, held the ground. Enemy forces had withdrawn or been buried beneath the mountain itself. No victory was announced, no cheers followed. The valley was taken. At dawn, reinforcements arrived to find soldiers sitting motionless among the dead, staring at nothing. Some still clutched weapons, others held photographs frozen into their hands. Harris was found alive beneath a pile of bodies, breathing shallowly, eyes open but unfocused. When asked what happened in Iron Valley, he never answered. The war moved on, maps changed, but Iron Valley was never used again. Supply routes were rerouted, orders quietly avoided the region. Soldiers passing nearby reported hearing gunfire echoing through the mountains on calm nights, even years later. Some swore they could see figures moving in the fog, still fighting, still charging, still dying. And the snow never turned white again. Years after the war ended, Iron Valley remained untouched. Maps still showed the route, but no convoys were sent through it. Officers avoided mentioning its name. When younger soldiers asked why the supply line was never reopened, the answer was always the same. The valley isn't empty. Veterans who survived Iron Valley were different from other soldiers. They didn't talk about medals or victories. Most refused interviews. Some never slept without the lights on. Others woke screaming, convinced they were buried under snow and bodies again. Harris was discharged 6 months after the war. Physically, he healed. Mentally, he never left the valley. He settled in a quiet town far from the mountains, took a job that required little speaking, and avoided crowds. At night, he dreamed of fog rolling down narrow slopes and the sound of bullets tearing the air apart. Sometimes he woke with his hands clenched, fingers stiff as if frozen around a rifle. He never spoke about Iron Valley until one winter night. A heavy snowstorm swept through the region, the kind that swallowed sound and turned streets into white corridors. Harris sat alone in his apartment when he heard it. Gunfire, faint, distant, echoing. He pressed his ear to the window, heart pounding. The city was silent. No sirens, no movement, just snow falling, and the unmistakable sound of battle carried on the wind. The next morning, the radio mentioned nothing, but Harris wasn't the only one who heard it. Reports surfaced quietly. Hunters, truck drivers, railway workers near the mountain region all claimed the same thing. On calm nights when the air was still, gunfire echoed from Iron Valley. Some swore they heard shouting, others heard whistles. A few claimed they saw movement in the fog, dark figures advancing uphill, only to vanish when approached. Military patrols were sent once. They returned early. Their report contained only one sentence: "There are tracks in the snow that lead nowhere." No further expeditions were ordered. Iron Valley was declared a restricted zone indefinitely. Years passed. The snow never melted completely there. Even in summer, frost clung to the ground. No animals lived in the valley. Birds avoided flying over it. Radios crackled with static when brought too close, as if the valley remembered, as if it refused to let the battle end. Harris died quietly in his sleep decades later. Among his belongings, his family found a small notebook. Inside were only a few words, written over and over in shaky handwriting. "We never stopped charging." Iron Valley still exists, buried beneath blood, snow, and silence. And on certain nights when the wind is right, the war returns. Not in history books, but in echoes.